At my mom's birthday, she called me good for nothing, and everyone laughed and giggled. But when my fiancé came in, their faces suddenly turned pale. He was the owner of the estate my parents lived in. The next morning, my mom called. They needed my help, so I did the unbelievable. Hello. Thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to John Abraham from Manchester. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into today's story. I arrived late on purpose. Not so late that it would be obvious. Just late enough that someone else would have already lit the candles, already poured the wine, already posed for photos. I didn't want to be part of the opening act. I didn't want to be seen in the light of expectation. When I walked in, the first thing I noticed was the way the dining room smelled. Too much perfume layered over the heaviness of beef stew and lemon floor polish. It was cloying familiar, a kind of smell that made the back of my throat itch. The cake had already been cut. I saw the sliver missing from the side like a pulled thread in a sweater. No one had waited, not even pretended to. They'd sung happy birthday without me. I stood in the doorway holding a bottle of wine no one noticed, like a guest at a party I hadn't been invited to. My mother didn't even turn her head when I entered. She was holding court at the head of the table, her favorite seat, the one with the high back and brass-studded arms, a throne in a suburban dining room. Her laughter was loud and performed. It echoed against the faux marble walls like a hollow threat. "Oh look," she said finally when someone gestured toward me. "The prodigal has arrived." She didn't rise. Didn't even smile. Just looked me over like I was wearing something offensive, though I'd chosen a soft blouse. Something she once said brought out my eyes. "You're late," she added, already bored. "I got caught in traffic," I mumbled, setting the wine down on the sideboard. No one looked at it. No one reached for a glass. Someone passed me a half-empty plate. Lukewarm meat, soggy green beans, mashed potatoes already crusting at the edges. There was no place set at the table, so I stood in the corner and picked at it like a stray. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself I was used to this. And I was. But that didn't make it any easier. Then it came. "Honestly," my mother said, just loud enough to be heard over the lull in conversation. "You're good for nothing except being an embarrassment. Look at you. Always drifting in like some bad smell." It wasn't the first time. It wasn't even the worst thing she'd said. But that night it landed differently. I looked up. I caught my sister stifling a smirk. My uncle let out a short bark of a laugh. Even my father cracked a grin, eyes not quite meeting mine. For a second I thought maybe I'd imagined it, maybe the room hadn't really laughed. But I could feel it. The air shifted. My face burned. My ears buzzed in that high brittle way that comes right before a sob. I didn't give them the satisfaction. I swallowed hard and stared down at my plate. I tasted nothing. Then the door opened. I didn't turn right away. I didn't need to. The silence told me everything. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Forks paused mid-air. Even my mother, the master of snide asides, shut her mouth so fast I heard the click of her teeth. My fiancé stepped in. He was overdressed for the occasion, in a way only he could make look effortless. A tailored charcoal suit, open collar, a single hand in his pocket like he owned the room, and he did. Technically, literally. He was the new owner of the estate my parents had been renting for 3 years. They didn't know that. Not until that moment. "Oh," my mother breathed, standing up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. "You made it." He smiled politely and walked over to me, placing a hand gently on my shoulder. I looked up at him and the expression in his eyes nearly undid me. Not pity. Not concern. Just warmth. Recognition. I stood taller without meaning to. "Traffic?" he asked quietly. "Yeah," I said, matching his quiet. He kissed my cheek. "Glad you're here." And just like that, the energy in the room shifted again. This time in my favor. My mother's smile grew brittle. She laughed too loudly, called for another round of drinks, tried to reclaim the attention she'd lost. But it didn't work. The room orbited someone else now. Me. I barely heard the rest of dinner. I couldn't taste it either. But I watched. I watched how they looked at him, how suddenly I became someone worth noticing. I watched my mother's eyes narrow as she realized he was more than just a guest. I saw the calculation, the shift, the subtle panic blooming just behind her mascara-thick lashes. She had no idea that by morning I'd already decided she would never get close to me again. She called at 8:06 the next morning. I watched the phone vibrate against the kitchen counter, slow and persistent like a heartbeat I didn't want to claim. The screen blinked MOM in bright letters, sharp against the muted morning light. I didn't answer the first time, or the second, but by the third, something in me relented. Not out of curiosity, not even out of habit, but out of something quieter and harder to name. Maybe I wanted to hear what apology sounded like when it was meant for someone powerful. Hello? I answered, voice flat. I didn't give her the pleasure of sounding surprised. There was a pause on the line, like she hadn't expected me to pick up. Or maybe she had, and didn't know what to do with the door she found open. Sweetheart, she said, her voice suddenly 10 years younger. Softer. That feigned sweetness that used to work when I was 7 and desperate to be loved. I wanted to say about last night. I waited. Let the silence stretch until she had to fill it. I shouldn't have said what I said, she continued. It was a joke. You know me. Sometimes my mouth runs faster than my head. She gave a breathy laugh, like we were co-conspirators in some harmless misunderstanding. I let the quiet settle again. I could hear birds outside my window, the rustle of leaves, the clink of my spoon as I stirred my tea. She must have heard it too. I know it hurt you, she added, quieter this time. And I'm sorry. There it was. The word I used to beg for in my head, every night before sleep. The word I imagined like a bandage, soft and white and clean. But now it sounded hollow, decorative, like a ribbon on a gift you didn't ask for. Before I could respond, she moved on. Listen, I wanted to ask you something. Her tone shifted too quickly, saccharine turning practical. Your fiancé, he owns the estate now, right? And there it was. The favor. She tried to mask it, dressing it in concern. Asked if he might consider renewing their lease under the old terms. Mentioned how hard it was to find a place these days. How your father's back isn't what it used to be. How moving would be such a hassle. How their lives were rooted there. I didn't speak for a long time. I thought about the estate, the land, the view, the wide glass doors that let the morning pour in. I thought about how my fiancé had handed me the keys a month ago and said, "It's yours too now." I remembered the guest room where my parents had once stayed briefly, back when my mother still pretended to like him. I thought about the way she looked at me last night, just before he walked in, like I was nothing, and how fast that look changed. "I'll talk to him," I said finally. "But Mom." "Yes, sweetheart. Don't confuse kindness with access." Another pause. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." Her voice hardened just enough to remind me of the woman I'd grown up with. "You've changed." "No," I said. "I'm just not scared anymore." I hung up before she could reply. My hands were shaking, but it wasn't fear. It was something else, something like freedom, edged with adrenaline. I stood by the kitchen sink and looked out at the garden. The rosemary was blooming again, the tiny purple flowers nodding in the breeze. For the first time in my life, I felt the ground beneath me was mine to stand on. Later that day, I told my fiancé everything. He listened like he always did, without interruption, without trying to fix it, just letting the story breathe between us. He didn't offer to call her, didn't suggest mediation or forgiveness. He just took my hand and said, "Whatever you need, I'm here." And I believed him. That night, I lay in bed watching the ceiling fan rotate in slow, lazy circles. I thought about how many years I'd spent wishing she would change, hoping for an apology that came with love instead of leverage. I realized then I didn't need her to change anymore. I just needed her gone. And this time I would be the one closing the door. I didn't cut her off right away. That would have been too loud, too obvious, too much like the kind of drama she would have savored. Instead, I did it slowly, softly, like folding a letter I'd never sent, tucking it into a drawer and forgetting which one. I let her text go unanswered. I let calls ring out until voicemail picked up her voice and held it hostage. When I did reply, it was with polite words and no warmth. "Thank you. We'll think about it. I'll let you know." Velvet gloves over clenched fists. My fiancé saw the shift in me. He said nothing at first, just started holding me closer in the quiet moments, his hand finding the back of my neck when I forgot to breathe. his thumb tracing lazy circles on my palm when silence stretched too long. He didn't ask for stories I didn't want to tell. He let them come when they were ready, like bruises blooming after a fall. We sat on the patio one evening, the sun dissolving into orange streaks over the hills. I told him about the first time I realized I was invisible. I was 9. My sister had broken a vase and blamed it on me. I hadn't even been in the room. But my mother's slap came before the explanation. I remembered the sound of it more than the pain. Sharp. Final. The kind of sound that teaches you to keep your voice down and your expectations lower. She told me I made her hand hurt. I said, my voice low. That it was my fault for flinching. He didn't look away. Didn't try to turn it into something poetic. He just said, I'm sorry. And that mattered more than I thought it would. The next morning, I asked him if he would transfer the estate into my name. Just the property my parents lived on. He didn't blink. You want to own it? I want the power they never thought I deserved, I said. I want to know what it feels like to hold the ground under their feet, and not feel guilty about it. Done, he said. No ceremony. No hesitation. It's yours. I didn't cry. I thought I would. But what I felt instead was a strange, steady kind of peace. Like stepping off a train I'd been stuck on for years, and realizing I could walk anywhere I wanted. After that, I started showing up with a different kind of presence. When my mother called again, this time to check in, I met her questions with soft, immovable answers. No, we hadn't decided yet. No, I didn't know if we'd keep them as tenants. Yes, we were reviewing all contracts. I kept my tone gentle, measured. The way she used to speak to bank managers when she needed a loan. She started to unravel in small ways. I heard it in her voice, the rising pitch, the forced laughter, the nervous clearing of her throat. I could almost hear her flipping through old mental scripts, searching for the one that used to work on me. But I wasn't reading from the same playbook anymore. One afternoon, I invited her and my father to lunch at the estate. Not our main house, just theirs. I set the table with fresh linen, lit a candle that smelled like cedar and something vaguely citrus. I served tea in the porcelain set she'd given me for a birthday she forgot to show up for. I watched her hands tremble slightly as she lifted the cup. They were polite. Too polite. My father complimented the garden, which he never used to notice. My mother asked about the lease, slipping the word in like a coin into a vending machine, expecting something sweet to drop out. I smiled and told her we were exploring a few options. The look in her eyes then, that was the moment I knew. She understood. She knew she was losing me, not in the dramatic way she used to accuse me of when I moved away or skipped a holiday, but in the quiet, irreversible way that mattered. In a way that couldn't be undone with tears or time. They left early, said they had errands. She didn't hug me goodbye. After they pulled out of the driveway, I stood barefoot on the gravel, the stones warm beneath my feet. I felt something I hadn't felt since childhood. Not joy, not triumph. Something simpler. A sense of having chosen myself, and not apologized for it. Later that night, as I lay beside my fiancé in the dark, I whispered, I think I'm becoming someone I respect. He pulled me closer and said, You always were. They just never saw it. And I knew then, I wasn't seeking revenge. I was reclaiming my narrative. I didn't plan the dinner to punish them. That's what I kept telling myself as I arranged the table. Each place setting perfectly spaced, the linen smooth as silence. I lit the candles slowly, one by one, as if each flame could burn away a version of me I no longer wanted to carry. The house felt too large that night, every sound echoing slightly, like it wasn't quite sure how to hold this moment. I wore something simple. Clean lines. Neutral tones. Nothing that could be mistaken for a performance. I didn't need theater. I had truth on my side. They arrived 5 minutes early. My mother knocked instead of using the doorbell. She never used to knock. My father hovered behind her, already scanning the edges of the property like he was calculating something. Value maybe or threat. I opened the door and offered a tight smile, stepping aside without speaking. Let them cross the threshold on their own. My fiancé greeted them warmly like always. He offered drinks, complimented my mother's earrings, asked my father about his back. He was gracious, effortlessly so, but I saw it in the way he stood. Not blocking their way but not giving ground either. He was kind, but he was no longer their equal, and they felt it. That awareness clung to them like static. Every compliment sounded slightly too eager, every laugh half a second too loud. Dinner was roasted lamb, herb potatoes, and steamed asparagus. I had the kitchen staff prepare it, but I plated everything myself. My mother used to say presentation is everything. She was right, but not in the way she meant. It wasn't about impressing anyone anymore. It was about clarity, precision, letting them see how carefully I could curate a moment they had no control over. We made small talk, vacant words passing between us like paper boats on a stormy sea. I asked about my sister. My mother gave clipped updates, then turned the conversation back to the estate. Again and again, each time with a different angle. Concern about the neighborhood, uncertainty around new management, just wanting to make sure we're all on the same page. I nodded and said we were still considering a few paths forward. That phrase seemed to unsettle her the most. Paths forward. As though she had wandered into someone else's garden and realized there was no trail back. After the plates were cleared, I brought out dessert dark chocolate torte with blood orange glaze. She hated dark chocolate. I knew that. She forced a smile as I served her, the corners of her mouth twitching like something inside her was unraveling stitch by stitch. "You've done well," she said finally. Her voice carried the weight of something she didn't want to name. "Thank you," I replied, offering nothing more. I let the silence stretch until it pulled taut. "I mean it," she added too quickly. "I'm proud of you." The words were beautiful, but she said them like she was trying to cross a bridge she'd burned long ago. Like she hoped I hadn't noticed. My father raised his glass, offered a toast. To new beginnings. It was rehearsed. His eyes didn't quite meet mine. We clinked glasses. And for a fleeting second, I almost let myself believe them. That maybe this was growth. Maybe people did change. Maybe all the years of silence and dismissal and contempt could somehow be softened by this. An evening of good food, forced smiles, and thinly veiled desperation. But then my mother said it. "So, will he be renewing the lease under the old terms?" She turned to my fiancé like I wasn't even there. Like I was still 12 and invisible, my value reduced to who I belonged to. He looked at me, and I answered for him. "No. We won't." The air shifted. A slow exhale that never came. My father tried to speak. My mother reached for her wine. I stood. "We'll be putting the property on the market. You'll have 60 days to make arrangements." My voice didn't waver. Not once. I looked her in the eye and saw it, panic disguised as indignation. She opened her mouth to protest, to ask why, but I cut her off gently. "You don't get to ask that anymore." My fiancé remained silent. A presence behind me, steady as stone. They left in silence. No hugs. No goodbyes. My mother's heels clicked too sharply on the marble as they walked out, a sound that used to haunt me in childhood, footsteps coming down the hallway. Always too fast, always meaning trouble. But now they receded. They shrank. They disappeared. I stood at the door long after they'd gone. The house smelled like citrus and lamb, and something bittersweet I couldn't name. On the table, a single petal had fallen from the centerpiece, a red camellia, soft and bruised at the edge. I picked it up and held it between my fingers. Power didn't feel like fire. It felt like stillness. The next morning, I walked the property alone. My fiancé had left early for a meeting, and the silence in the house settled thick around me, like dust on velvet. I needed to feel the space without anyone else's breath in it. I needed to listen to the walls. It had rained the night before, and the stone path that looped around the garden glistened in the pale morning light. I followed it barefoot, the wetness seeping into my skin, grounding me in the kind of way nothing ever had in that other house. The one I grew up in, the one they'd carved my silence into like initials in wet cement. I let my feet carry me to the guest house. It wasn't large, just a tidy two-bedroom cottage tucked behind the lemon trees. My parents had lived there since the previous owner let them rent it for less than it was worth, a fact they used to brag about like it was a sign of divine favor rather than someone else's pity. When the estate changed hands and my fiancé quietly took the reins, they never imagined the walls could hold someone else's loyalty. I stepped inside. The air was stale. The curtains drawn. Dust floated in the slanted light like suspended time. Everything was still there. Their furniture, their knickknacks, the water-stained photograph of my sister's wedding in a frame that had always made me feel like a placeholder in my own life. I moved through the rooms without touching anything. It was all so familiar it felt foreign. The floral couch with the threadbare arms. The chipped end table with the burn mark from a candle left unattended. The wooden spoon in the kitchen drawer, that still had the bite marks from my mother's rage. Back when she used objects instead of words. Or sometimes both. I paused at the hallway. This was the worst of it. The short hallway with the low ceiling and the dent in the drywall. Where my shoulder hit the night I finally said no. I was 16. I had refused to go to church. Just once. And the fallout lasted weeks. She told the neighbors I was going through a phase. She told my father to get control of me. That night, I slept in the car. I ran my hand along the wall now slowly. The dent was still there. I thought about fixing it. Then I thought about tearing the whole place down. But I didn't do either. Instead, I walked to the bedroom they used to sleep in, and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress had a memory of them. 2 indentations where their bodies had rested for years. It struck me suddenly that most of the things they owned had never been replaced. As if they never expected to change. As if permanence was a thing you earned by being cruel enough long enough. I stared at the dresser. My father's old cologne bottle sat half empty on the tray. Beside it, my mother's compact mirror. I picked it up without thinking and opened it. My reflection stared back, older, stronger, but still carrying echoes in the eyes. I snapped it shut. Then I opened the drawer. Papers. Receipts. Old keys. A letter from the electric company unopened. And then folded carefully. A small note in my mother's handwriting. I recognized it immediately. The way her Y-looped closed like a trap. It wasn't addressed. Just a single sentence scrawled on yellow stationery. She won't last without us. I don't know when she wrote it. I don't know if it was about me. But the moment I read it, I knew it was. I sat there for a long time. And then I stood up, took the note and walked outside. I didn't burn it. I didn't tear it. I buried it. Right beneath the lemon tree where the roots could take it. Let the bitterness soak into something that might, one day, bloom sweet. That afternoon, I called the estate lawyer and confirmed the paperwork. The property was mine. Not my fiance's. Not theirs. Mine. The lease would end in 30 days. I had offered them double the grace period required. I wasn't cruel. I just wasn't afraid anymore. That night I told my fiancé everything. About the note. About the dent in the wall. About the ghost furniture that still whispered their names. He didn't say much. Just held my hand and let my silence have space. Later, as I lay in bed, I realized the house I'd built in my heart, the one I'd always longed for, didn't have a door for them anymore. And for the first time, that didn't feel like loss. Felt like reclamation. I invited them back one last time.
No pretense.
No whine. No promise of resolution. Just a simple message: we need to talk. Please come tomorrow at 4. They arrived like they always did, tense, overdressed, and unsure of the temperature. My father wore his one good jacket, the collar slightly turned. My mother had chosen pearls, a silent plea for elegance, for control. I opened the door and let them in without ceremony. I didn't offer them a seat. They followed me down the hallway like they were entering a courtroom. I led them to the smallest room in the house. The quiet room. It was meant to be a study.
No windows, no distractions.
Just pale walls and a single wooden table with 3 chairs. I had arranged it deliberately, 1 chair at the head, 2 on the other side. I sat alone at the head. They hesitated. This feels formal, my mother said, laughing tightly. It is, I replied, motioning to the chairs. Please. They sat stiffly, unsure of the rules. I didn't start with accusations. I didn't start with anger. I started with facts. Memories presented calmly, as if I were reading from a report. The missed birthdays. The public humiliations. The way they spoke about me like I wasn't in the room, like I was never really part of their story, just a difficult footnote. I watched their faces change slowly. I'm not here for an apology, I said when my mother began to shift, to search for a softened version of herself. This isn't about repair. It's about closure. My father crossed his arms. So you're cutting us off? No, I said. I'm closing the door you've left open too long. The one that lets you in and out of my life whenever you need something. That door? It's done. My mother's lips parted, but no words came. Her eyes glistened with something she would call sadness, but I knew better. It was the grief of losing control. The mourning of a manipulator whose strings had been cut. I took out a piece of paper. It was a copy of the lease termination notice. Official polite final. I slid it across the table. You have 30 days, I said. That's more than generous. You'll find we've made arrangements to assist with moving costs. But this chapter is over. Silence settled in the room like dust. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. I could hear my own heartbeat steady now. Not racing. Not afraid. My mother's voice cracked. We're your parents. I know. And that doesn't mean anything to you? It means something. Just not what you think. She looked at my father, who stared at the table as if it might save him. We gave you everything, she whispered, the old script making its final plea. You gave me life, I said. But I gave myself everything else. The words didn't come from pride. They came from a deep bone-level truth. From the child who had raised herself in the corners of that house, who learned to survive on scraps of love and the occasional accidental kindness of strangers. I stood. They didn't. I think that's all, I said. They sat for a moment longer, not sure what to do with this version of me. Not sure if they should fight or cry or pretend none of this was happening. I didn't give them a script. I didn't give them an exit line. Eventually, they stood and walked out without a word. I followed them to the front door but didn't hold it open. They let themselves out. My mother paused at the threshold like she wanted to turn back but didn't. My father kept walking. When the door closed, I didn't cry. I walked back to the quiet room and sat alone for a while. Let the silence settle over me like ash. Not heavy, just final. The room felt warmer somehow. I had expected grief, but what I felt was something else. Something almost holy. I felt light. News moves like mist in small places, slow at first, then everywhere at once. By the end of the week, the whispers had made their rounds. The estate was changing hands. The tenants were being asked to leave. And not just any tenants, the family of the owner's fiancé. Everyone had an opinion. Most kept theirs behind careful smiles. But a few let their sympathy show on their sleeves, like a badge they thought I might thank them for. I didn't. There were no announcements, no letters to the editor, no grand declarations. Just quiet shifts. My parents stopped attending church. My sister called once, voice tense with questions she didn't know how to ask. I told her the truth, not the version we grew up rehearsing. She hung up without saying goodbye. Then the email came. My fiancé found it first, sitting in his inbox like a stain. It was from my father. The tone changed line by line, beginning with entitlement, veering into condescension, and ending in a desperate kind of pleading. He asked for reconsideration, called the decision harsh, said it wasn't what family does. Then, as if remembering who he was speaking to, he softened, talked about pride, legacy, the weight of losing everything. He didn't mention me once. My fiancé forwarded the email to me without comment. I read it on the patio, the afternoon sun pouring over the marble like syrup. The lemon tree swayed gently in the breeze, and for a moment, everything felt too quiet to contain the past. I didn't reply. I didn't even finish the email. Halfway through, I closed the screen and deleted it. Later that evening, I walked out to the edge of the property where the lawn met the low stone wall that overlooked the hills. The city below glimmered faintly, like something imagined. I stood there and tried to remember what it felt like to need their approval. It was like trying to remember pain after it's gone. A dull echo, distant and vague, impossible to fully resurrect. I let myself smile. Not a triumphant smile. Not cruel. Just free. The next morning, I received a letter. Not from my parents. From Mrs. Garvey, the neighbor 3 houses down who used to bring me wildflowers pressed into old books when I was a child. I hadn't seen her in years. The note was brief. I always knew you were more than they made you believe. I hope you know it too. With love, JG. I pressed the card to my chest and closed my eyes. It wasn't validation. It wasn't closure. But it was something gentle. A stranger's kindness tucked into the cracks they left behind. The move-out date drew closer. I didn't check in. I didn't ask how it was going. The estate manager handled everything. I gave no instructions beyond what was fair and decent. They were being treated better in departure than they ever treated me in presence. That irony did not go unnoticed. On their final day, I didn't drive by. I didn't linger near the window or refresh my phone. I went to the coast instead. Walked barefoot in the surf, the salt thick in my hair. The horizon vast and forgiving. I picked up a stone, smooth, flat, gray with a white streak like a healed wound, and kept it in my pocket. That night, my fiancé and I made dinner together in silence. Not an uncomfortable silence. The kind where everything that needed to be said had already found its way into the light. As we ate, he looked at me and asked, "Do you feel finished?" I thought about it for a long moment. Then I shook my head. "No," I said. "I don't think it's about finishing. I think it's about not needing to continue." He nodded and we kept eating. Outside, the wind shifted. Somewhere in the distance, I imagined a door closing. Quiet. Certain. And this time I was the one who turned the key. The guest house sat empty for weeks. Not for lack of interest. There were more inquiries than I could count, but I didn't rush. I let the silence breathe. I let the rooms cool down from the weight of their presence. Sometimes I walked through it late at night, barefoot on the tile, just to hear the echo of my own steps. Didn't feel haunted. Just vacant. Like something had been removed, gently, without ceremony. One morning I brought a fresh coat of paint and a brush. The lemon-colored walls went white. Then soft gray. I didn't hire anyone. I needed to do it myself. Each stroke felt like a kind of baptism, not of the space but of the self I had been inside it. I opened every window, let the air roll through. The curtains fluttered like lungs relearning how to breathe. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. Not entirely. But it was the start of something. That evening I found myself in the bedroom again. The one with the dent in the wall, and the mirror that never told me the truth. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands in my lap, and waited for the familiar ache. It didn't come. What came instead was a question. What if I could let this go without pretending it never happened? That's what no one tells you about healing. It's not erasure. It's acceptance with your eyes open. The next day I packed the few belongings they'd left behind. Forgotten sweaters, half-burnt candles, a ceramic angel with a chipped wing. I wrapped each item in newspaper and placed them gently in a box. Not because I owed them care, but because I needed to be careful. With myself. With the parts of me that had once believed love had to hurt. I didn't return the box. I donated it to a second-hand store 3 towns over. Let someone else decide what their story meant. Weeks passed. Then a month. Then another. Spring arrived slowly, crawling up the hillside in bursts of green and birdsong. My fiancé and I walked the estate one morning, coffee in hand, the sky a pale wash of silver. The lemon tree had blossomed early. Tiny white flowers clung to the branches like promises. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the stone I had taken from the beach on the day they left. Smooth, familiar, cool in my hand. I knelt at the base of the tree and placed it gently in the dirt, right above the letter I'd buried. Something old beneath the roots. Something new above them. He didn't ask why. He just touched my shoulder and let it be. That afternoon, I opened a letter from my mother. It was short. Just a few lines scrawled in her angular hand. I'm sorry. For what it's worth. I don't expect anything back. Just wanted you to know I'm trying. I didn't cry. I didn't crumble. I didn't feel triumphant. What I felt was ready. I sat down at my desk, pulled a blank card from the drawer, and wrote just one sentence in return. I hope you are. I sealed it, stamped it, and dropped it in the mail without ceremony. It wasn't forgiveness. Not fully. Not yet. But it was something like it. That night, I stood in the doorway of the quiet room. The chair I'd once used as a shield now stood alone in the corner. The table had been cleared. The walls had absorbed the last of the echoes. I didn't need the room anymore. I had made my peace somewhere larger. Somewhere inside myself. And in the stillness, in the hush that followed revenge, I found something unexpected. Not victory. Not revenge fulfilled. But peace. Earned. Not given. If this story stirred something in you, if you've ever walked away to reclaim your worth or longed for peace more than revenge, share it with someone who might need that reminder, too. And if you're ready to write your own quiet reclamation, know this. The story doesn't have to end in anger. It can end in becoming. See you soon in our next story.